Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Metzler, Director of Programming here at the Green Film Festival, San Francisco. Glad to be back and showing some really cool films from all around the world. Um, you're in for a really special treat, or at least you just saw a really special treat with the Strait Guys. And we're lucky enough to have the director here, Rick, here. Thanks, Rick.
Hi, thanks for having me, Chris.
Nice. I imagine one of the things that, folks in the audience are wondering is like, how did you kind of stumble upon this story? And how did you decide, like, okay, take this leap of faith that you were going to kind of follow its journey?
Well, I grew up in California, and we had a globe in my family. I always I keep an inflatable globe here, and I was always fascinated by looking at the globe, just like that. I'm talking the 1980s Cold War, and I'm like, the U.S. Let's see, here's Alaska, and there's Russia. I'm like, we're neighbors up at the Arctic, up in the Arctic. I always thought of, looked at the world more like, I don't know, this way, and that Russia was like really far away. But if you look at it this way, we're neighbors, kind of up there in Alaska. And it maybe about 20 years ago, I first heard this idea about this tunnel connecting Asia and North America. And then it was in 2010, I had just finished a film and was trying to think about what to do next. And I started researching it. And I kept coming across this name, George Kumal, retired Czech-born mining engineer living in Tucson, Arizona. So I just looked him up in the Tucson phone book and online and found him and called him. And he was thrilled that someone was interested. And we talked for about an hour. And then he told me he was going to some conference in Washington, D.C., a U.S.-Russian conference a few months later. So I flew over to Washington and met him. And this is a quirky old guy. And he had this other quirky old guy, Joe from Anchorage, Alaska, with him. And they struck me as like the odd couple. And I thought, there's something to this story. And it really picked up. It picked up because we got invited to meet the Russian ambassador. We were at a reception at the Russian embassy. This is all 2010. And we were meeting with a Congressman, Dennis Kucinich, who was in the Foreign Relations Committee at the time. And he was really excited about this tunnel project. And I thought, there might be something to this. So I just kept following them. They kept getting invited to all these conferences, and they went and visited the English Channel Tunnel to see how that got built. And there were some Koreans who were financing that whole trip. And so I got really intrigued by why are the Koreans interested? And it just kind of kept growing from there.
That's cool. And then, on this kind of journey, it's like you kind of just really don't know where things are going. Did you kind of like, were you editing the film at the same time, or you're just like, look, I'm just going to kind of capture the story as it evolves? And at what point in time did you know to set down the camera, I guess, and that, that was the kind of film that you wanted to make?
Well, the only editing I was doing that time was editing pitch trailers, because my producer Gunter, my main German producer Gunter, I live in Germany. My main German producer Gunter and I were trying to get money for the film, so we were going to various pitching events at festivals in Europe, and we always have to have some kind of a trailer to show. So that's the only editing I was doing. At that point, I was just filming by myself. I didn't even have that first trip to Washington. All I had was like a little pocket camera that shot 720p video. It was some of that ended up in the film. But then it took us about 6 years to get some money, and we got German TV, and then we got Finnish TV, Canadian TV. It's going to be on Canada in November, broadcast in British Columbia in November on Knowledge Network. And then we started getting German Film Fund money, which is basically grant. It's soft loans, basically. And then it kind of came together, and then we took this big trip in 2018. Because we saw that George and Joe were not getting any younger, and we thought we better do this before it's too late, even though the film wasn't totally financed. And then we started editing in 2019, and it was taking a while, and then the pandemic hit, and we had a long pause. And then all in all, we finished in February of this year, so it took 12 years.
And you've had some really great characters on screen. Was what do in being on this kind of adventure, in a way, like, what sort of things most surprised you that you never really expected?
Oh, wow. Surprises. Well, the mayor of Nome, Alaska, Richard Benville, is a real great character with his, he's with his top hat when he's singing that one time. And I met him in a conference in Fairbanks the year before, so I already knew this guy was going to be a great character, and I kept in touch with him, and he was generous enough to show us around. He also worked as he died, unfortunately, but he worked as a tour guide, and so he was used to showing people around, and he loved being on camera. So he was great. Surprises. I really didn't know how the native people at the Bering Strait would react to all this in Wales and on Little Diomede. So that was quite a fascinating experience. On the one hand, them wanting to preserve their traditions and being afraid of change, but at the same time, they're losing these traditions because of climate change. And I think the one guy on Little Diomede, Robert, points it out pretty well when he shows the meat hole, and he says that they used to catch 200 to 300 walruses per year, and now they get maybe 5 to 10 because of climate change. The water's getting warmer, and the walruses have migrated further north to colder water, so it's affecting their lifestyle. And now they fly in a bunch of processed food by helicopter, and that's what they're eating mostly now. They're losing their subsistence lifestyle, and that has nothing to do with this tunnel, whether this tunnel gets built or not. It's really change that's basically beyond their control, climate related changes.
And do you think
That was a surprise for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, in some ways, the kind of concept for this tunnel and this kind of idea is kind of an interesting way to kind of explore this area that's kind of undergoing so many changes. And no matter what happens, it's interesting to kind of pull back the curtain and kind of travel to this place that many of us, will never have a chance to spend time with, but we've got a chance to spend time with it via your film. I mean, what is there kind of a postscript of the film of, like, since you finished up, what's like, what else has happened, and also, like, how have people kind of responded to the film in these communities?
Well, we updated those title cards at the end that after George died in April, and then so that kind of got us up to date. Russia started this horrible war in Ukraine, which really put this project completely on hold.
Mhm.
And then George died, and then since then there were some details we didn't include. For instance, Scott did have several meetings at the State Department as Senator Lisa Murkowski from Alaska. Her office really facilitated that, like she promised when we met her at the airport in Nome. And basically the US was about to take up official diplomatic relations with Russia about this Bering Strait, about the Intercontinental Railway, so they could really have diplomatic, just discussions, and not just people like George and Scott, private persons trying to promote it. And then the war came along, so everything's on ice. Scott also has a study group that he's been putting together with universities in the US, Canada, China, and Russia, so the 4 main countries that would be involved. But before they could get started, the war started. so it's really kind of the whole idea is kind of in a holding pattern at the moment.
If you had to kind of forecast, like 10 years or 20 years down the road, what do you think will or will not happen?
Oh, you're asking a tough one there. I would have given you a totally different answer before February, before
Right.
the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because I was quite optimistic. Let's just think about, like, during the pandemic, the news that was getting through to me is I've seen all the overcrowded Pacific ports. I'm from Southern California. I was seeing images of all these cargo ships lined up outside Long Beach Harbor, not being able to come into the harbor. And I thought, the Pacific port capacities have maxed out. If we keep consuming like we do like we currently are, we're going to have to find other ways to transport goods besides just ships, cargo ships and airplanes. And that's where this intercontinental railway would really come into play. If we reduce our consumption, then maybe it wouldn't really be necessary. So that's kind of, totally up in the air. But I think with this, what's going on with Russia, I think it's going to be very tough for anyone to seriously do business with Russia for years to come. I mean, there's today's news now about this mobilization that Putin's ordering, and it's getting pretty frightening. So I really didn't anticipate that at all, because we were given a very warm welcome in Russia. It was really easy to film there. We had absolutely no restrictions. The Yakutsia Railways people were very happy to meet with us. We met with the governor of Yakutsia, which is larger than India. We're talking about massive territory. And the guys gave a presentation at the Duma. I mean, it was like, that would be the equivalent of giving a presentation at a congressional hearing in Washington. And they've never gotten that far in the US so far. So I was really quite optimistic, but the tides have turned, and the political, something's going to have to change at the political level.
Absolutely. Yeah, every day it's kind of a new surprise in that way. And then as we kind of wrap things up, I guess one question that's just kind of more kind of green or environmental related is that, with many of the people that you met, particularly in Alaska, like, is there kind of assumption that no matter what happens, climate change, the kind of momentum's there, and so this kind of opening things up, I guess, for trade in different ways is just kind of like default of like, we might as well take advantage of the opportunity? Or are there folks that still feel like that maybe they can kind of stop the tide, I guess, in relationship to climate change, and that they can kind of maintain some of the things that they value as they are now?
I got a sense. I was in Alaska a year ago, last summer, shooting a new film on the North Slope, the northernmost point of the U.S., with 4 climate scientists from Colorado State University who were doing field work about the effects of thawing permafrost on the weather, and really intriguing. So I got to get the feel for another part of Alaska. It's such a big state, and they don't exactly lead a very sustainable lifestyle. They just burn gas and oil like mad because they've got tons of it. Throw trash everywhere, and it's kind of a messy place just because they have so much space. So they haven't had to think in an environmentally conscious way, and they tend to get pretty upset about environmentalists who are trying to stop new oil projects from being done and stuff, because that's their main source of income for the state of Alaska. It's a total income, it's a fossil fuel state, and there seems to be, my perspective has been that they're quite reluctant to change that, or they don't really, there aren't enough innovators there with money or access to capital who can really make big changes there. So I don't know, they still they import 90% of their food on barges coming up from Washington, from Tacoma, Washington. That's you can get just about anything you can get down on the lower 48, but it's more expensive. But they don't yet seem to understand how this railroad could benefit them, and it's a little hard for them to imagine. Most people we talk to, it's a little hard for them to imagine that it would be if it were a railroad that didn't just end in Alaska and go down to the lower 48, but continued over into Asia, it would have a completely different dimension to it. And then Alaska would really become a crossroads between Asia and North America, rather than just be like the end stop in North America.
Right.
I mean,
Which I guess
it's kind of a stretch of the imagination to think that far.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's always the conundrum with these big projects, right? It's like, there's always a kind of leap of faith, I guess, much like making documentaries in that way.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, cool. I always try to remind our audiences here that, like, we're lucky enough for filmmakers to share their films with us, and so we, in a way, are their kind of grassroots street team. So if you like the film, go and share about it on social media, and I know many folks might want to continue to follow your efforts, especially with this new film. So yeah, what's the good way to kind of keep up to date on your next projects, and or also just be able to spread word about the film?
Well, we have a website, thestraightguys.com. You can sign up for our mailing list there, which helps. Then you'll get notified about new things that are going on. We have a Facebook page, The Strait Guys. You can catch us there. I have a Patreon page too. You can just look me up, Rick Minnick, if you like what I do and want to become a patron. That's great. I started a new weekly YouTube series called Tales from the Cutting Room Floor. And every Thursday I publish a new short video that's featuring something that ended up on the cutting room floor from some film I've made in the last 30 years, and telling stories about reflecting upon why certain things didn't work out the way I thought they might. And recently, like when Gorbachev died, I remembered that I filmed Gorbachev when he was in Berlin for the 10th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. So I dug up the little mini DV tape from 1999 and when he was here, and watched it, and then realized it's, oh wow, George Bush and his wife are on the balcony with Gorbachev and Gorbachev's wife, and Helmut Kohl and his wife, and I was like, wow, I was there witnessing history. And so I'm just digging around in my archives, finding stuff. So yeah, that's
very cool. That's all through your Patreon channel?
well, that's just on my YouTube channel. You
Okay.
can just look me up, Rick Minnick, and Tales from the Cutting Room Floor is the playlist. So subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's free. That always helps too. At some point, maybe I'll be able to start getting some advertising money.
Well, very
And
cool.
but I'll say this for anyone, for all filmmakers, and Chris too. Most of us have our own websites, and you can watch our films through our websites, and that's always really appreciated because we get most of the money. It doesn't end up with distributors who don't pay their filmmakers. So that's really a great way to help all filmmakers in general, like directly paying a few dollars to stream their films. You can do that through my website too.
Yeah, and Rick has had quite a few good films over the years that we've actually had a chance to kind of watch in San Francisco. So Forgetting Dad and Homemade Hillbilly Jam.
Homemade Hillbilly Jam, yeah.
Both really, for the kind of SF Indie Fest audience out there, dig them up. I think you'd definitely get a kick out of them. Well, thanks again, Rick. Have a great day, and looking forward to seeing everybody at the festival.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to being there. I'll be there in person for the screening on the 9th if anyone decides to come in person. And yeah, have a good day.
Very cool. Thanks, guys.